What's happening? My name is goukigod, and in this video we're going to be taking a second look at Doom and see how it stacks up now as opposed to when it first launched. So Doom launched in May, and the 2016 version of Doom is a throwback to earlier FPS titles, and it delivers fast, twitch-based action and hilariously over-the-top gore. When it originally launched, the campaign was received well, but the multiplayer was criticised for being too derivative of other first-person shooters. Lots of people felt that it strayed too far from the arena-style gameplay that had been promised by Bethesda in the lead-up to the game's launch, and that it was ultimately just another Call of Duty clone. On top of that, there were concerns that certain elements of the multiplayer were either game-breaking or lifted directly from other games. The demon pickups, for example, were heavily criticised for being overpowered, and the hack modules were thought to be too similar to Call of Duty's perk system. For many players, it simply didn't feel like a Doom multiplayer should, and it failed to set itself apart from other online shooters. But despite its lackluster multiplayer, most critics seem to agree that the single-player campaign alone was worth the purchase. Now, as someone who's mostly interested in the multiplayer aspect of a first-person shooter, this was a big concern. For me personally, and for many others, the multiplayer is by far the most important component of any FPS. If it has a decent campaign, that's definitely a bonus, but it's not usually the main reason I'm interested in picking something up. Considering that the multiplayer usually makes up at least 50% of the game's content or more, it's a big deal if only half the game is considered worth playing. That's also assuming that you're happy playing offline. If you're like me and the campaign doesn't interest you, then Doom is probably going to be a hard sell. So 6 months down the line, what has Bethesda and id done with the game? Is it a better value product? And if you haven't purchased it already, should you care? So let's firstly talk about the multiplayer. If you weren't aware, the multiplayer was not actually built by id, instead it was outsourced to a studio called Affinity. Now, Affinity do have experience with FPS titles and have worked on big franchises such as Halo and Call of Duty. They even worked on the most recent remastering of Modern Warfare, and maybe that's why the multiplayer ended up feeling so much like those games. Now, in response to the backlash shortly after launch, id took back control of the multiplayer from Affinity and promised to turn things around. So let's take a look at what id has done, not just with the multiplayer but with the game in general. So what's new since launch? Well, quite a bit. There have been a few free updates as well as some paid DLC, so let's talk about the free content first. The first free update mainly focused on the multiplayer and included lots of minor changes such as weapon balancing, bug fixing and tweaks to the UI. The second free update was much more substantial, and along with more bug fixes and balance changes, it added new game modes to the multiplayer such as Capture the Flag. The map editing tool SnapMap also got a bunch of new items, including a new playable demon, it got new props, a new visual theme and new weapons. The third free update added multiplayer modes that lots of players felt were missing at launch, such as Team Deathmatch, and this update also added the ability to create private games. And once again, this update had more bug fixes and changes to the game balance. The fourth free update was pretty substantial and included a bunch of new features, including arcade mode, which was basically a score-based and streamlined version of the campaign with all the weapons and upgrades made available from the start. Classic modules were added to SnapMap, which allowed multiplayer arenas to be built in the style of the original PC game, and the first 3 levels of the original game were also provided to play through as a kind of mini retro campaign. There was also a couple of new multiplayer modes added. The first one is Possession, which is Doom's version of Infected, and there was also a new free-for-all mode added called Blood Rush. There were also new options added into the lobby system, so for example there was a region selector, and also the ability to vote on maps in between rounds was added. And just like with the previous updates, a lot of new items and upgrades were added to SnapMap. Now, along with all this free DLC, there's also been a couple of paid expansions. At the point of me making this video, 2 out of the 3 planned expansions have been released, and they focus purely on the multiplayer as well. The first DLC pack, Unto the Evil, includes 3 new multiplayer maps, a new demon, a new weapon, a new piece of equipment, and new cosmetic items. Hell Followed is the second DLC pack and is again multiplayer focused and includes 3 new maps, another playable demon, a new weapon, 1 new equipment item, and cosmetic items such as armor and taunts. So as you can see, there has been a significant amount of content added to the game, both free and paid, since launch, with the promise of more to come. So from a content point of view, Doom offers a considerably more content-rich experience than what it did at launch. Alright, so let's move on to some of the game's issues. Now, Doom wasn't particularly well known for having bugs or anything at launch. It launched reasonably stable, which is saying quite a lot for a Bethesda game. And since launch, there have been numerous bug fixes and updates, but there are still a few technical issues that are lingering. I've noticed on the PS4 version that there is some screen tearing, particularly on the first stage, and particularly in large open areas. It's certainly not game breaking, but it can be quite jarring in a game that's so dependent on fast movement and being able to react quickly. The other issue, and arguably the most significant issue with Doom, is the load times. These are absolutely brutal, and it's particularly noticeable when you're moving between modes. On average, this can take minutes, which is absolutely ridiculous. But apart from these issues, Doom otherwise runs pretty flawlessly. Frame rate for the most part seems to be about 60 frames per second, and as a result, gameplay feels fluid. So the question is, with everything I've just talked about, does it make Doom a better value product? Well, firstly, the price has dropped considerably since launch, so it should be possible to pick this up pretty cheap. Also, Bethesda and id seem pretty committed to the Doom community with plenty of post-launch support, which is surprising given the sales of this game. Incidentally, I think Doom has shipped under 2 million copies globally, which isn't a small number, but it's nowhere near the numbers that other AAA shooters have achieved in 2016, which makes the post-launch support all the more impressive. Finally, the multiplayer, which was arguably the biggest issue with the game at launch. There's definitely a lot more content, but it doesn't change what a lot of people feel is fundamentally wrong with it, and I think it won't change a lot of people's opinions. Still, if you can accept what it is, it can be fun, and it's far from being bad. There are just plenty of other shooters to pick from in 2016 that I feel have more compelling online modes. At the end of the day, Doom remains an acquired taste, and I think a lot of Doom's appeal relies on people having fond memories of the original games. So in answer to whether I think it's worth the purchase now, yes, I do think Doom is worth the price so long as you can get it at a discount. If you're a fan of the series and you've been on the fence about picking it up, then I definitely think it's worth a look in. Even if you're not, I think the stellar campaign is worth the price alone. I wouldn't pay full price, but it shouldn't be hard to pick this up cheaply. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Doom. I want to thank you guys for watching the video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'm out.